Like everything else in nature, consciousness too evolves. Like everything else in nature, like societies, like civilizations, it dies. What dies is born again, dies again, and again the cycle repeats. Before our species burst into consciousness, we and the world were one. There was no we and world, only the one. Dreamlessly the true men of earlier times slept, wrote Jean Gebser. Truly the soul of humanity, as distinct from nature, was dormant. Perceive, Gebser continues, in some small measure the splendour of origin, the first radiance, still present within us, of the emergent world. An image that can perhaps best describe the birth of human consciousness is a breeze that passes through a quiet forest, carrying the leaves from their branches. Caught on the wind, alone now, individuated, carried on as yet unknown currents, the leaves whirl through the world, lost and inevitably twirling, falling to the ground. From here is born what Gebser describes as the magical structure of consciousness. Man and world are no longer one. It's the story of the book of Genesis, the biblical fool. The species begins to understand itself as something separate from nature. In historical terms, here begins the age of the hunter-gatherer. The man of the magic structure has been released from his harmony or identity with the whole. With that, a first process of consciousness began. It was still sleep-like. For the first time, not only was man in the world, but he began to face the world in its sleep-like outlines. Therewith arose the germ of a need, that of no longer being in the world, but of having the world. In this way, this second structure of consciousness, that which evolved out of the primordial whole, represents the birth of the human soul, as distinct from the soul of nature. Inevitably, therefore, so begins our species' epoch-spanning attempt to gain ultimate mastery over nature, to make and to fabricate, to wield a power which is felt to be separate from, though continuous with, the forces of the natural world. But while the human spirit is now capable of self-differentiation from its environment, it is not yet, however, entirely capable of differentiation per se. It is uncensored. Human spirit remains human spirit, rather than the subjective human spirits within the species. The birth of the individual ego is still some millennia away. Identification here is therefore done by tribal association. The individual, quote, can only be defined and understood in relation to the group. The defining feature of this third stage in our development, the mythical structure, is two-dimensional polarity. With the growth of the first civilizations came the beginning of our severance from the natural world, which throughout the previous phase had come to be seen as something to overcome. Mass agriculture and our increasing aptitude with increasingly complex tools enabled us to begin to distinguish ourselves from nature, no longer merely psychologically, but physically too. In response perhaps to this loss of the primordial womb, the origin, myth and religion played an increasingly important role as we sought to reconnect with what Gebser called that ever-present origin. The advent of metacognition, to be aware, and to be aware of being aware, saw the emergence of the concept of the soul. the animating principle at the core of every being's being. Storytelling became a necessary technology through which to understand the individual's role in the cosmic order. The penultimate stage is also, incidentally, our own. The good news is that the mental structure precedes a moment of genuine historical propensity. Because for centuries, we in the developed West have been living in thrall of what Iain McGilchrist describes as an increasingly mechanistic, fragmented, decontextualized world, marked by unwarranted optimism, mixed with paranoia and a feeling of emptiness. It's a mode of being that in the increasingly globalized world has spread to every corner of the earth. It began with painting. The art of the 16th and 17th centuries introduced the idea of perspective. The technical cleverness of Giotto, Michelangelo and their contemporaries allowed for the illusion of depth, the creation of three-dimensionality. In a sense, this painting creates other secondary worlds, where previously ancient art could be seen as patterning on the walls of this one. The invention of perspective in painting allowed for individuals to engage with the work from and to a single subjective perspective. The first-person narrative is one that simply did not exist previously. Indeed, the concept of the hero itself, inherited from the Greeks and the Romans, as that single someone up against the innumerable forces of the world, is a relatively new invention. Truly, we are the loneliest people in history. For Iain McGilchrist, this, quote, ability to stand back from the world, from ourselves and from the immediacy of experience, enables us to take control of the world around us, rather than simply respond to it. From this impoverished perspective, we fall, inevitably, in on ourselves. The cycle, it would seem, is nearly complete. The journey of our species through consciousness can now be viewed rather as a retraction. We have retreated from the womb of nature herself into the forest, from the forest into our cities, from our cities into our bodies, and now, here, from our bodies into our heads. 21st century technology has got us to the point where we needn't move at all, and yet, there is now nowhere else to run. The Colour of Pomegranates is a 1969 film by Armenian director Sergei Parajanov. On a basic level, it's a biopic of the country's national poet, Sayat Nova. In the late 60s, when the film was made, Armenia was struggling to hold on to the sense of self-identity that was slowly being swallowed by the Soviet one. And the director here is sticking two fingers up at a political program that was seeking to reduce the world to a single pervasive monotony, or what Iain McGilchrist describes as a sterile fantasy, the product of a lack of imagination, a fantasy that displaces and renders inaccessible the vibrant, living, profoundly creative world that it was our fortune to inherit. Sayat Nova is revered as an Armenian national icon, and here Parajanov offers a cinematic extolment to this king of song by providing a poetical interpretation of the poet's movement through life, from birth to death. Indeed, among its innumerable qualities, what is perhaps most notable about the film is its treatment of time. For the Soviets, the only acceptable style of cinema was social realism, in which time moves linearly, in which characters are beholden to what Gebser describes as a system of measurements or relationships between two moments. The fifth and final structure of consciousness sees this perspectival understanding of time collapse. As the mental gives way to the integral, time is experienced as a single, cohesive whole. To the perception of the aperspectival world, time appears to be the very fundamental function, and to be of a most complex nature. It manifests itself in accordance with a given consciousness structure, as clock time, natural time, cosmic or sidereal time, as biological duration, rhythm, meter, as mutation, discontinuity, relativity, as vital dynamics, psychic energy, and as mental dividing. It manifests itself as the unity of the past, present, and future, as the creative principle and the power of imagination. Parajanov's characters are carried on a river of time with many tributaries. They are waved through from childhood to maturity and back again inside a single scene. Time is not something fixed. It flows fast and slow, less how it registers on a clock face, more in keeping with how it is experienced. Empires collapse and are rebuilt inside 15 furious seconds of dream time. Heartbreak, what is in essence a single moment in which the body is ripped open and vital parts of the anatomy are butchered before our eyes, is spread across eons. The pain never stops. The hands of a clock mean nothing here. Why won't they move? Why won't my pain stop? Or why are they moving so fast? I want more minutes. Integral consciousness is the last phase of our development, because the concept of development by definition positions that which is developed on the arrow of time, on a single point somewhere along the path from this or that into this or that. If the idea of time as we experience it moving ever forwards at Nabokov's rate of some 4,500 heartbeats an hour is only how we experience it, then the ending of our experience of it represents the end of time as such. End of time. The end times. About 100 years ago, German historian and classicist Oswald Spengler boldly predicted that by the year 2200, Western civilization would collapse. Towards the end of his life, Spengler, a famous pessimist, went further. He began to see apocalypse as the only possible outcome of a species seemingly hell-bent on self-destruction. Much like Gebser's model for the evolution of consciousness, civilizations go through cycles of birth, growth, and death, much like the life of a single human individual. Cycles within cycles. To take this further even, it's a pattern mirrored in a single significant episode in the life of a single individual. The so-called hero's journey. Everything, anything, to be a tool, requires a birth of some sort. Requires a period in which that which was born is, in which it bees, and a point in which it dies, or comes home. It's the same thing. In this way, Spengler's apocalypse, the end of the world, might be merely what this transition into a new, aperspectival consciousness looks like from our limited point of view. A mode of being in which being itself ceases to be. For psychologist Carl Jung, nothingness is the same as the fullness. In infinity, full is as good as empty. Nothingness is empty and full. That which is endless and eternal has no qualities. It has all qualities. Therein both thinking and being cease because the eternal and endless possess no qualities. As Joseph Campbell explains,
it is the experience of the eternity.
Yeah.
The experience of the eternal.
As what you are.
Yes.
I would say.
That whatever eternity is here right now.
Or nowhere else. Or everywhere else. If you don't experience it now, you're never going to get it. Because when you get to heaven, that's not eternal, that's just everlasting. Heaven lasts a long time. It's not eternal. It's everlasting.
Well, I don't follow that now.
The eternal is beyond time. The concept of time shuts out eternity.
As the age-old adage goes, the night is always darkest just before the dawn. And, like all births, this transition from the dark into the light is painful. We'll kick and scream, no doubt. We won't want to go. The end, however, is not really the end. It is the start of something greater, more complete, more whole. And when it is all over, when we are complete, when we are whole, when is re-established the inviolate and pristine state of origin, we will fall silent.